Welcome to the OpenTreasury Podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by CTMfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where Treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. And now your host, Jack Large.
Hello and welcome to our first OpenTreasury podcast for our new owner's strategic treasurer, which was finally formally announced today, which I'm very pleased to say. I'm Jack Large, CTMfile editor, and I'm here with our deputy editor, Poole. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Jack. Good to be here.
Today, we're going to be focusing on two areas, really. One is it's the season of surveys just before the conference season in the autumn. And we had 3 surveys from different sources, all looking at developments in the Treasury space and how corporate Treasury is reacting to the pandemic and other challenges. The first one was on the 2nd of August, was from the ACT, the UK ACT. Our article was entitled as Corporate Treasury Moves to the Centre of Business, What Keeps Treasurers Awake at Night? And what was really interesting was they came up with some surprising findings. One of which was the treasurers are not so worried about technology and that sort of stuff. The first worry was about staffing and recruitment. And the other surprise was that when people were asked about what keeps you awake at night, over 25% of them said, I've no worries. There's nothing that worries me at the moment. Where have they been? What have they been doing? I mean, it's just a real surprise.
Well, they've clearly already fully automated their treasury, and they've just got the RPA and the artificial intelligence doing it all for them, Jack. They've got their feet up, having a nice cup of coffee, mulling the next sort of 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, it was really important piece of work looking at how things that you would think have been top of their worry beads about technology and regulation and climate change concern didn't really figure. Very interesting. Right, then you did a survey, didn't you? Or sorry, you reviewed another survey from Sarala. How did that go?
Yeah, this was Sarala's Future of Finance Survey 2021, and a little bit sort of looking back at the past year and the impact of the pandemic on Treasury, and also a bit looking forward as well. Perhaps unsurprisingly, reduced liquidity, cash flow and working capital were the top areas of concern for many organisations over the past year, and their survey respondents cited challenges like limited visibility into private company risk and reduced funding cycles as some of the challenges they were coming up against. And almost half, I think about 47%, said they'd struggled with cash flow continuity in that year. So that's really the kind of the number one challenge that respondents to that survey were facing. Also, manual processes continue to be a challenge. This was the highest ranked issue in terms of challenges across every area of finance that they were speaking to. So treasury and cash management, 44% identified manual processes as a challenge. Accounts receivable, 41%. Same for accounts payable, and also payments, 39%. So clearly there's more automation to be done. And as soon as that can get in progress for corporates, it really sort of helps them free up a bit of time and energy from repetitive work and be able to focus on that good stuff, the strategic planning ahead.
And no mention of the issue that the ACT picked up on is that the main worry was training and recruitment and personnel matters within the Treasury Department.
There wasn't much on the personnel side in the Sarala report. They did note that digitisation is very necessary for remote work, which obviously has been a big issue in the past year, and I think will continue to be something that organisations look at in terms of having a flexible workforce, and that as a way of keeping a more inclusive workforce as well. The survey did say that the majority of finance organisations indicated they're satisfied with their processes. I think 77% said that, but a third of respondents said that a lack of digital process infrastructure and standardised and automated processes slowed down their main focuses as they were working remotely. So that's clearly, it was a bit of a shock when I guess March 2020, suddenly everyone was having to work remotely and scramble to sort that out. And it sounds like there's still a challenge there in having a workforce that's spread out and not centralised in a headquarters or an office somewhere.
It's interesting how the surveys bounce around. The next survey that we looked at, which we reported again on the 16th of August, the Strategic Treasurer Survey for Treasury, the TMS provider, well, more than a TMS provider, and they were looking at 250 corporations around the world and banks and other suppliers. And what they found was that there was strong intentions to buy and increase the level of technology. Also, that the respondents were worried about moving to new standards and the new problems that these ISO 20022 standard introduces, which was not surprising, but rather worrying that we are probably heading towards a crisis of confidence in new standards. Nobody's coming up with solutions as to how we're going to overcome that. But again, the survey was interesting in terms of what corporate treasurers thinking about things and what they worry about. And these 250 organisations were picking up on things like payment messages were particularly important, but the size of the vendor ecosystem. That means that rather than just having one solution, you have a combined solution that provides the whole thing together. And the vendor ecosystem is becoming much more important. Again, a useful survey. And so that really sums up where we're going. We're starting to see treasurers looking in all directions as to how they're going to solve today and tomorrow's problems. There's no clear solution, in my opinion. Was your take on that about the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing with ISO 20022 is the migration to it is a fast change in terms of the moving from the Swift MT standards over to ISO 20022. You know, it's short-term pain now for long-term gain later, because what it does enable is much richer data to be included in transactions and standardized data across countries as well. So I think in the long term is really going to be really good for Treasury, you know, as we get closer to real-time Treasury management and the focus on data-driven insights for treasurers. That's all there in that standard, but I would agree that getting that migration done, and it's obviously a big pain for the banks as well, who are kind of leading in that regard. So I think it's short-term pain now, long-term gain later.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a treasurer of one of the biggest companies in the world in 40 plus countries, and the variations in the application of the standards is, well, he didn't call it hilarious, but it sounded hilarious to me. The huge differences are not going to go away anytime soon. Anyway, enough about moaning. You then moved on to look at two other things. First on trade finance. What was the story here?
Yeah, this was off the back of Swift releasing a new paper called Digitising Trade, Now or Never, which sounds like a bit of an ultimatum. But basically, Swift had been looking at the data that flows across its network in terms of how efforts to digitise trade could help to reduce friction in global transactions and commerce. And according to Swift Watch, which kind of studies all this data, documentary trade finance had declined by up to 49% week on week in late April last year, and it took pretty much the whole rest of the year for volumes to rebound, eventually ending the year down 11%. So they didn't rebound all the way. But interestingly, despite that overall drop in global trade, usage of Swift's digital trade channel solution increased by just over 72% on the year, which I think shows the kind of the appetite among corporates for digitization. And I think it was over $2 trillion in documentary trade that Swift processed in that time. That's really interesting because, again, it kind of comes back to the data point, digitization of trade, providing that richer data, which then offers the potential for greater insight into supply chains, potentially a more transparent trade finance system. And that can actually help further down the chain, if you like, in the supply chain, promoting financial inclusion by enabling better trade finance access to medium and smaller companies. So that's what their report was about. And this is, of course, ahead of a big change coming in trade finance messaging as part of the Swift Release 2021, which is coming in November. This year's release is looking to support the moving away from unstructured messages to more complex and structured message types that actually do allow for increased straight-through processing and automation. That theme again, I think, of changing the standards. And this particular release is looking to upgrade the functionality and format of messages for standby letters of credit and also guarantees. And that builds on the Swift release from 2018, which had the focus on documentary credit messages. So big change coming in November. And a lot of the fintech firms have been testing their platforms against these new standards so that they can get accredited with a very fancy Swift-compatible application label for 2021. So we had the likes of Finastra and SureComp announcing that they've been able to achieve that label in the past week. So another area that Treasury has an eye on that's really looking at enhancing the data and enhancing the standards and getting everything more structured.
But there is a big but, isn't there? It's what came up in the survey that in different ways, and Strategic Treasurer picked up on it, is the resistance to new standards. It's going to be a huge battle, but a very interesting one. The other topic you looked at was how corporates are reacting to what they want from request to pay, the new way of doing business. There was mixed messages out of that, wasn't there?
Yeah, well, this was an interesting bit of research that the Euro Banking Association had done with PPI, looking at what corporates want out of request to pay. And the report kind of highlights specific corporate needs and pain points and expectations about this new development, really. And it focused on 4 main use cases that came out of the research, which is kind of point of sale and point of interaction, online commerce, e-invoicing, and recurring payments. So these were sort of the 4 main areas that request to pay has particularly good chance to enhance, really, as it comes online. Almost 100% of the people that the EBA surveyed showed an interest in using this new instrument and support the offering of a Europe-wide mode of operation for request to pay. And around 9 out of 10 said they'd be interested in using it for cross-border payments in Europe. Although obviously there aren't that many borders in Europe these days with the SEPA infrastructure. Interestingly, there was one additional benefit of request to pay that was mentioned across all 4 of those use cases, which was the provision of structured billing information, invoice and receipts as part of it. So again, getting that structured data that the corporate can use, analyse and use to inform their operations. A couple more benefits included easier and better reconciliation, and also the flexibility to offer payment in instalments, which is quite a big trend at the moment as well. So those benefits were seen in all of those use cases apart from the point of sale or interaction. Finally, they did highlight also some missing elements at the moment that corporates are looking for with this instrument, such as uniform pan-European solution or experience, so that consistency from country to country they don't think is quite there yet. and the use of request to pay in combination with instant payments, or the guarantee irrevocability of payments as well. That was another one. So quite interesting to kind of pick the brains of the corporates they were speaking to, see where this instrument fits, and see what else needs to be worked on as it gets integrated into our overall payment infrastructure.
All the stories that we are talking about are on CTMfile, and you can read them in full there. From this first OpenTreasury podcast, what would be your key takeaway that surprised you?
I think my key takeaway is really just kind of around the area of digitization and what it means to corporates, and the challenges that corporates might face. You mentioned from the ACT survey in terms of the unhappiness in having to make changes, but also being able to look beyond that and see the benefits to come. So clearly Treasury is in flux at the moment, and there's a kind of a bright future ahead, but it really is putting in the work now, and unfortunately the expenditure now as well, to make sure that you're in a perfect position to capture those opportunities.
Agreed. My takeaway would be that this vast range of corporate reactions to the current situation are really amazing. I'd never thought I'd see 25% plus of the ACT respondents saying that they have no worries about the future, no concerns. Where have they been? Anyway, thanks very much for listening. Talk to you next fortnight. Cheers. Bye. Cheers, Ben.
Thanks, Jack. Bye.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.